Hi, my name is Cecil Walker,
And I'm Adam Frower.
and this is Possibilities. In this particular conversation, we are going to chat a bit about how to build good habits, how to start to do the things we want to see ourselves doing, and hopefully, consequently, less of what we don't want to see ourselves doing. So, Adam, solve everyone's life right here in a few sentences. How do we do good habits?
Yeah, I think the way that you introduce that is an important kind of thing to highlight. And oftentimes when people come in and they talk to us, they say, I want to stop doing X, Y, Z, right? Like I want to stop overeating, or I want to stop looking at pornography, or I want to stop. So they'll emphasize, I want to stop doing something.
Yeah.
And one of the things that you kind of commented on at the very beginning was we're going to really be talking about how do you build good habits. And so I think there is a component that's important of like stopping bad habits. But I think actually what's more powerful is if I put my energy and attention into building good habits, then that energy and attention will be taken and I won't have time or energy to do bad things or what we deem bad things.
Right.
And so I think that's in and of itself key number one is start thinking about, start focusing on, start emphasizing what kind of habits do I want to have. And I think that one thing, that simple shift from not just eliminating something, but building something, that's key, because if all you're trying to do is stop something, you're going to leave a vacuum, right? You're going to leave an empty space, and then you're going to wonder, like, what do I do with that space or time? Or then all you do is kind of ruminate on, I used to do this thing, but now I can't do this thing. And that goes through the filter. Oftentimes we talk about like going through the filter of problem, right? And so in my doing nothing, the filter of problem is still present. Whereas if I know what it is that I'm trying to build, I don't have to go through the filter of problem in order to build something. I'm going through the different filter completely, which is the building filter.
Yeah, I think, this maybe sounds obvious that in order to stop doing something bad, maybe you should replace it with something good. But I think that's just a powerful statement in and of itself, because it's so hard to just accomplish, don't do that thing. If you tell someone, don't think about whatever thing, it's hard to just do that. It's hard to just delete this thing from your mind and leave a vacuum. The most success you could have at that is if you tried really hard to think about something else rather than trying really hard to accomplish the task of not thinking about whatever that original thing was. Because in trying to do that task, all you're doing is sitting with fighting off that feeling of, I keep thinking about this thing. There's really a famous series of experiments I'm sure lots of people have heard about, like the marshmallow test they would do with children, which was very much a lot about resisting temptation and seeing kind of what's at the base human interaction with temptation, especially in really young humans. And there's so many different variations of it and different things that they were looking at within these tests. But one of the things that they noticed in those series of tests was that when you would get children to successfully not eat the marshmallow, when the researchers would leave the room, I guess I should also describe what the actual test was in the first place. They were looking at how long children could resist eating marshmallow if they asked them to refrain from doing so. And in some of these instances, they would say, we'll give you 2 marshmallows if you just wait and don't eat this one. So it's delayed gratification, it's not giving into temptation, all those kinds of things. But the people who were successful, the toddlers who were successful at this, it wasn't just that they sat there and stared at that marshmallow and said to themselves over and over, don't do it. They would distract themselves. They would do something else. They would start counting things that are in the room. They would start maybe hiding their face from the marshmallow. They would tend to something else, just to kind of keep themselves busy with some other thing so that they don't give into that bad thing. And I think a lot of that kind of highlights what you're saying as far as it's it's really hard to just not do something. What you actually need to try to aim for is, what am I going to do instead? What's the thing that's going to hold this place?
Yeah, and I think one of the things that is pertinent to solution-focused work is Steve DeShazer used to always say the solution may have nothing to do with the problem. And I think that crosses over here. I think that, if I'm trying not to overeat, then some people think, well, then the fill-in or what I'm going to build is exercise, right? Like and it's those two things are really directly correlated to each other. Both are going to lead to health if I decrease intake, if I increase exercise. But I don't think that we're necessarily advocating for a direct crossover. I think you can fill that space or time with anything that's meaningful. And I think this gets at this idea that we talk a lot about in solution-focused work as well, is becoming the best version of myself. And I think let's again take this example of not overeating. I think if I think, I want to become a better musician. So I'm going to start practicing the piano, or I'm going to sing more often, or whatever it happens to be, right? Simply by putting effort and energy into music, it takes away the mental space, the time, the focus, the energy and attention on eating. And so they don't necessarily both have to lead toward health, but they do both contribute to me becoming the version of myself that I want to become. So I think one of the foundational principles in all of this is when you're trying to stop certain habits and build other habits, you want to know, what is it that I'm building toward? I really like that word, building new habits, but you're building new habits for a purpose. And so it's not just playing music to play music, but it's to become a musician or whatever it is. And I think you know this because you are a musician, but I have 3 kids who practice the piano. And it's like they slowly build up, but inevitably, at least 2 of the 3 have hit this hump where it's like, I don't like doing this because it's hard. And we have said, like, if you just get over the hump, if you get to a place where now you're proficient, then you can start to play things that you like and you enjoy, and it won't be difficult because you have the foundation. You've crested the hill in some sense. And my oldest daughter, she has kind of crested that hill, and she now loves to play the piano, and she finds it enjoyable, and she plays lots of things. And my son is kind of at the pinnacle of that hill, and he's like, I don't know if I want to make it over the hill. This is really unenjoyable right now. And so I think, again, if you can kind of catch the vision of, if you just push through difficulty now in building, you're going to get to a place of loving it, and that version of you'll become a musician, not just somebody who forces themselves to play the piano. Now you'll be a musician and you can play whatever you want. And so we're trying to grow the musician version of him, and he's saying, well, it's really hard to become that version of myself. So I think that's a key component in this process.
You're absolutely right. And having lived through that hump myself, it feels like, and maybe this is what a lot of people experience when they're trying to build habits and it feels like it doesn't work out. You get to that hump and it's like it's hard for no reason. You're gonna have to put all this effort in, and you just can't feel any sense of connection to a payoff for that. But as you keep going with that, I'm speaking specifically in music, but I know this applies to lots of other things. You keep going with that and it starts to feel like, oh, this is hard for all the right reasons. This is, the payoff is always happening. It's instant. When I can see myself working through this and I get the musical experience that I'm wanting to get from this, or I make it sound how I want to make it sound, or I play these things that I've always wanted to play. I make this really beautiful music that I enjoy listening to, and now I can have some input into and control over. You get to a certain stage of, it might be difficult at times, or I might struggle with some things, but in fact, I might want to go towards that struggle because I've done so much and gotten so far now that struggle lets me know that I'm still moving, and I'm making progress, and that I'm engaging with this in a meaningful kind of a way. So I think that starts to like really take us to a second point that might be important in building good habits, and that's, I guess, feeling like you have to feel like it's worth it. And the thing that makes it worth it is this word that you use, purpose. What's the purpose of this thing that I'm trying to do? Why am I fitting this into my life? Why am I putting effort towards this thing that apparently is so hard that we need to have a conversation about how to put this thing, how to make this thing happen?
Yeah, I think that, I guess if I take one step back for a second, I think that it's human nature to strive to accomplish something. And I think that's really evident in the work that we do. So many people come in and they say, I want to stop doing such and such, right? Or I want to get back to a version of myself that I used to be. I used to do this and now I don't anymore, and I want to get that back. And so I think there's something really rewarding about accomplishing things, about striving for things, about overcoming challenge and difficulty. So I think it's innate in this human experience. So I think that's part of it. But I think another part of it is I guess one of the principles that we talk a lot about in solution-focused therapy is honoring autonomy, honoring agency. And I think this is at the crux of that. When I feel like I'm doing something, that I'm accomplishing something, that I'm becoming the kind of person that I want to become, there's a sense of autonomy, that I've made this choice, that I have pursued this on my own, that without coercion, this is something that I've done. And I think that for the human psyche, that's worthwhile and that's fulfilling. And it helps us to kind of maximize on this human experience. So I think that's part of it. I think another component of it is, again, it kind of comes back to this idea of agency, which is choice. When we're doing something that we deem to be a bad habit, oftentimes we feel captured by it. We feel bound by it. We feel like we have given up control. We've lost our agency. And so in some sense, overcoming that, in essence, is the human triumph. I didn't let something control me, but instead I am in control of me. And so I think at the very base level, that's a very human experience, to want to be in control of our own existence.
Let me ask you, I think this is possibly unfairly a hard question, but that's what you're here for.
You always ask unfairly hard questions.
And you always give unfairly brilliant answers. How at that point, someone, recognizing that this is, the stuff of human experience, to overcome these triumphs, we're at a point where maybe we're thinking, I don't feel like I have agency, but it's very much inside of us to reclaim that agency and see ourselves, overcoming this thing. But turn that into a process of what is it that we do to make that happen? How do we tap into this thing that you're saying is innate for human beings and really, I don't know, give the go that we need to really get there?
Yeah, as you were talking, as you were asking that question, the idea or the concept of addiction came to my mind, right? Because it's that idea of like, I'm giving up my agency to these obsessions, to these compulsions, to this substance or this behavior, and I feel a complete lack of control. And there's entire areas of philosophy or conceptualization that say, once an addict, always an addict. Once you do this thing, or once you've kind of given up control to this substance or behavior, you can never fully get it back. And I think that to me, that feels really reductionistic of like this, my experience at one period of my time one period of my life is more totalitarian than the other experiences of my life, right? Before I became an addict, there was lots of time that I wasn't an addict. And why is that time less valuable than the time when I was an addict? And so I think one of the things that I would say is we have to start rethinking ideas of labels and ideas of bad habits. And I think we can temporarily give up our agency to a substance or to a behavior but there isn't ever a time where we can't reclaim it, right? There's entire groups of people where they say, I am a recovering alcoholic and I've been clean for X number of years. And again, I think, why are we valuing this time? Why are we labeling and saying this period of time that label fit, that now is the totality of who I am, instead of saying you're somebody who is no longer doing that, who has reclaimed your agency. So I think one of the things that's really important is to believe that it's possible to change our identity, to become a different version of ourselves. So I think that's important. I think another thing that's really important in because your question really was not how do we label these things, but how do you move from one to the other. And I think catching that vision is one of the first steps of saying I could reclaim my agency. And so I think one of the things that we have to start doing at that point is to say, so why do I want to? What would be the benefits of that? And I think in solution focus, one of the simplest questions that we ask is, if you weren't doing that, what would you like to be doing instead?
Right.
And sometimes it's a really hard question for people to answer, because they're like, I don't know. This experience has kind of captured my full attention for so long. I haven't really even thought of what I would like to do instead. And so I think that's one of the first steps, is to say, if I wasn't doing this bad habit, what good habit would I be doing instead? Or what version of myself would show up instead? I think that's one thing. I think another really important component of moving from a place of giving up autonomy to moving to a place of autonomy, ironically, is involve other people. Tell other people, say, this is the version of myself I'm trying to become. And then say, can you just be on the lookout for when I become that version? What would you see? What would you notice? And you could call it an accountability partner. I suppose it is an accountability partner. But sometimes with accountability partners, I think they say things like, if you ever see me doing such and such, or if you see me at risk of doing such, point it out to me. And I think that could be valuable. But I think what's way more valuable is to say, if you catch the vision of me that I'm trying to become, could you just support me and tell me about it, and tell me what you notice, and lift me up and support me? And I think so many times we've talked about this idea of hope, right? If somebody points out you're doing it, you're becoming the version of you that you want to become, that builds hope, that builds momentum, that tells me I can use my agency to do this more.
Yeah, I really like this, several fantastic points that I think you made, but we don't have all day, so I can't bounce off of all of them. But I do really like that idea of you can make this more realistic. You can make this happen and come to you by telling other people of the version of yourself that you're trying to become. And I think that kind of is very much connected to one of your earlier points of you have to see yourself as being capable of being that version of yourself. And so through telling other people, here's who I want to be, here's the direction I want to go in, they kind of link you to that version of yourself now. They're seeing you in those kinds of ways and saying, this is more or less like that version of you now. And that kind of requires you to stay in line with that. Doing such and such things means I'm this much closer to being that version of myself. Or on this particular day, it feels like I kind of strayed away from that version of myself. And so now I find myself trying to pull back into that direction. It feels like it really solidifies your living within the boundaries of that version of yourself, because you've shared that with other people. They're seeing you in that kind of a light now. And I think that's an important part of the process.
So I guess that's then, I'll ask you a hard question. If some of the early steps are, to identify what is the version of you that you want to be, and then involve other people who can support you in becoming that version, are there practical, everyday, do this, you became a really good musician and it came down to sitting at the piano for a long period of time, are there practical, if you do these things, that's going to help you?
There are some really practical things. So once you kind of identified, here's what I want to do, here's who I want to be, here's the directions that are really pulling me, the versions of myself I want to become, the transformations that I want to see happening in me. If you stew on and make sense of those things that you described, I feel like action starts to come your way. Now you start to say, I'm feeling like I really need to do this to be this kind of a person. Or as I'm being in line with this version of myself, I'm more inclined to do this sort of thing. And if the hard part for you, for anyone trying to build these good habits, is taking the step to do those actions, I don't think it has to be I think a lot of people think about doing, building good habits as you just have to summon, some innate power inside of yourself and just from scratch do something amazing. But I don't think it has to be that. I think you can kind of build on who you are and what you like and what's already happening for you. You just can stretch yourself in that direction rather than seemingly building a whole new foundation of a person. And so what that can look like is maybe a lot of different things. In music, I noticed when I was a bit older than your son, maybe a year or two older than your son now, so he's at this hump where he maybe doesn't want to practice or whatever. And I very much felt like that because I felt like it was hard. It took a lot of thinking. It took time. But I did always like to play the songs that I liked. And so maybe when I should have been practicing Mozart or Beethoven, I was, fiddling around playing songs that I like to listen to on the radio. And that brought me a lot of joy. And then as I got older and better practiced in piano, I could stretch that out to start to look at more, well, what's the music theory of that's happening in these songs that I seem to really enjoy? What's going on that we work so hard to study in classical music that I could kind of start to see and piece together in this more popular music? And now I'm moving towards that. I'm a well-rehearsed musician and know music really well in a general sense. And I didn't have to get rid of my whole self to do that. I didn't have to throw away who I was and build a whole new foundation of I'm a classical pianist. It was a kind of a stretching of who I knew I was before. I like this draws my attention, so let me keep going and stretching that in a direction. And before I knew it, I could find music is really beautiful to me, and all of this is music, and so I could work hard at all of this. I could see myself having a hand in all of these things. And so it wasn't like a New Year's resolution of I need to start being this kind of person this day. I have no experience of that so far, but I'm just going to give it a shot. It was, I'm already a certain kind of a person. I know who I am. I know what I like. I know what tends to grab my attention. I just need to stretch that a little bit more towards the version of myself that I want to be.
Yeah, I really like that idea of just stretching, right? Because it makes it just like, what's the next step instead of like, I have to become this huge thing. And as you were talking, one of the things that came to my mind too is that it might be very different for different people. One of the things that I'm kind of thinking about is you and I both run periodically, but the way that we run is totally different. Not necessarily like what steps, but I run inside on a treadmill. And recently, when I tried to not run inside, I injured myself, right? So now it has reconfirmed I am only an inside runner. And you are very much an outdoor runner. And I think one of the things that we have to look at is how come? Like, what is it about that experience that makes us run? And I, for better or worse, really like watching the miles tick. And I like to see the statistics all written out in front of me. And I like to think, if I just push this button a couple more times, I could reach the goal a little bit faster. And for you, I think it's very much like a not thinking experience, right? It's like, I don't want to pay attention to the details of what it is that I'm doing or how it is that I'm doing it. And in some sense, I want to be thinking about something entirely different. And if we put you on a treadmill, you'd probably be bored out of your mind.
It would feel like it takes forever. It'd be like a prison.
And so I think that's the other thing that's really important in this building good habits is discovering like, how do you need to do this task or develop this habit in a way that's consistent with you? And so I think there's a level of deliberateness that comes into it of saying like, yeah, I want to be a runner, but there's lots of different kinds of runners and there's lots of different ways to be successful as a runner. And so I think it's not just identifying the task that you want to do, but it's identifying what's going to work for you in developing the habit of accomplishing that task. And again, I think that comes back to this idea of agency and autonomy. We do the same thing, but we do it very differently because one way works for me and a different way works for you.
Yeah, I really like that idea. I feel like maybe people get so disheartened by holding this image of here's what someone looks like when they're doing this thing, when they're accomplishing this good habit, when they're living this kind of lifestyle. And it's like they might feel like that's so far away from who I am. I can't do that. I don't like that. That doesn't appeal to me. That doesn't fit with my life. But that doesn't have to be how it is. You can build the good habit that you want to have. You can be the version of yourself you want to be. And like you're saying, do it in a way that is true to you, that is cohesive with who you are and what works for you.
Yeah, I really liked in your analogy before of like when you didn't really love playing the piano because it was difficult, you still loved playing songs that you knew and liked.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that still helped you to become a musician. It wasn't typical piano lessons, but it was still practicing the skills of playing the piano. So kind of reinventing what does it mean to become this kind of a person.
Absolutely. And when you really let yourself do that and get engage with that, explore that, it shows you that the stuff you find in your own corner of how you're embracing this version of yourself can allow you to access even more. The things you thought you could never do before or you wouldn't be interested in before, now that you've gotten to know your own corner so well, now you can stretch yourself out even further and go to some of those other places. I didn't think I was a Beethoven kind of a pianist, but as you sink yourself further and further into music and you get more and more familiar with it and you feel like you know the language of music, it's inevitable that you become a Beethoven kind of a pianist. You start to see there's beautiful stuff in all the corners of this world, and I want some of all of it.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. So one question that may not be a fair question, but how do you know when you've succeeded? How do you know when you're pursuing this habit, you want to build this thing, how do you know when you've achieved it?
That's a great question. I'll forgive you for how unfairly difficult it is because I do think it's a good question to ponder. I think one of the markers, and maybe there are multiple, maybe people have different perspectives. One of the markers of you're doing it, you're succeeding, I think, is when it really starts to move beyond I'm trying to get to one singular point somewhere on the road, and it transforms into I am living in the process. I am in love with the process. The process itself of moving in this direction is stimulating in a very positive way for me. If we keep sticking with this music analogy, I don't know that I could say there's one singular point that I want to get to or be or accomplish. And even if there was, what do I do after I get there? Do I just stop playing and stop learning, stop moving along with music? I don't know what that would look like, but I do know that the whole process of exploring more and more music, fiddling around with things, looking at what's happening in this music over here, how does it compare to music over here? Even engaging with younger people, I still teach a little bit of music, and how are they, people who are new to some of this stuff, how are they looking at this and what are they seeing? All of that, it feels like it just keeps stretching me, and that process of stretching, I totally love, and that's what's kind of behind my love of music right now. If I said like, where's the point where I've become a great musician and I can feel like I did it, I accomplished this, I don't know where that would be, and I don't know that I would be that satisfied if I'd reached that point because I don't know where I would go from there.
Yeah, one of the things I guess I hear in that, which I think is really valuable, is developing good habits is really also akin to the creative process, right? Like there's an infinite amount of creativity. Just because I have, mastered a technique, or I know how to make, if I'm a potter, I know how to make one kind of a pot. There's an infinite more pots that are out there to be made, and so I think that's one of the things. And again, I keep harkening back to this idea of autonomy and agency. If we stick to you've arrived at a certain thing, then now you're bound again, right? You don't have autonomy, you don't have agency to like now you are this thing. But if we take that perspective of like this is more a creative process, this is a journey of becoming that's continual, I get to always be using that autonomy to say, like, now what do I want to, now that I know how to make this kind of a pot, what other kind of pots do I want to make? Or if I don't make pots anymore, I want to make something else. What else do I want to make? And so I think if we kind of hold on to good habits really are infinite. It's about constantly becoming rather than I have arrived.
Yeah, I like that. This constantly becoming. I think that's exactly what it is, and I hope that people can see that applies to almost anything. If you look back at the running that you and I were talking about, I don't know what your running experience is in, because to me it looks like prison. But I can see that I have these goals of, I'd like to run this amount, this many times, or this amount of distance. But when it comes down to the singular instance, when I'm in the run itself, I am running and I'm getting the experience of it. I could feel my stamina being tested. I can enjoy the experience of, you don't know what sunlight is like, but being outdoors with sunlight and air, and the things that you see and the ground that you feel like you're covering. It's the process itself that it feels like I can engage with that. It's totally separate from, here's where I want to be. I want to be at a point of, I've ran this many miles in a week, or I've been able to do this many days in a week. It feels like you fall into more of, like you said, the becoming itself, rather than where am I and how do I get to this one point that I want to get into.
Yeah. Well, I think that's probably all the time we have for today. But I think, I hope that was a useful conversation on building good habits, and kind of shifting our perspective from stopping things to becoming the kind of person we want to become. So if you found this useful, please like this below and share it with other people who you think might benefit from this conversation. We would also love to hear your thoughts and feedback as well. So let us know what you think.